The wind coming off the high ridges of Frost Valley had a way of slicing through coats and bone alike, the sort of cold that made even tough men reconsider their choices. Rowan Hale trudged down the frozen main street of Silver Bend with a pack mule dragging behind him, the animal's breath puffing into the air in weary clouds. Snow swept across the ground like drifting ash from a dead fire. Rowan had spent the last 14 years living alone in the northern mountains, where only pine trees and wolves knew his name. He'd gone there to stay out of reach from people, from trouble, and from the warrant that claimed he'd murdered a magistrate he'd never met. Towns were dangerous places for a man with his history, but Winter didn't give a damn. Winter demanded fuel, salt, cartridges, and food, and so he had come. The folks of Silver Bend stared the moment he stepped into view. They always did. Some whispered. Others pretended not to look but watched him out of the corners of their eyes. Someone on a porch muttered, "That's Rowan, the one they call the Ghost Trapper." A second voice added, "Killed a lawman, they say." Rowan ignored them. Rumors moved quicker than frostbite, and truth had no use in places ruled by fear. He reached for the door of Bellard's trading post when a flicker of movement caught his eye. Something small, quick, half-hidden. Rowan paused. His hand drifted toward the revolver at his hip before he realized the shadow wasn't danger. It was a girl. Or a woman, young enough to still have hope if life ever gave her any. She dug through a pile of refuse behind the store, moving with the tense speed of a coyote. Her dress was too thin for the cold, her fingers cracked and red, her breath coming out in small panic clouds. Snowflakes clung to her hair like broken stars. She pulled a chunk of stale bread from the trash as if it were gold. Rowan wasn't sure why he walked toward her. Maybe it was the way she looked ready to bolt. Maybe it was because he'd spent his first years in the wilderness starving himself almost to madness. Or maybe it was the look in her eyes, sharp, proud, and scared all at once. "Miss," he said quietly. She whirled, pressing her back to the wall. Her eyes were a fierce shade of blue, cold enough to cut. She didn't blink. She didn't speak. She only watched him like he was another predator. Rowan slowly reached into his coat, not for his gun, but for the leather pouch of dust-flecked gold he'd spent months gathering. 3 months worth of back-breaking, freezing work. He held it loosely, unsure what he meant to do until the words left him. "Can I buy you?" Her expression snapped from fear to fury. Then, unexpectedly, there came a bitter twist of humor. "You couldn't afford my freedom," she said. The words struck him harder than any fist. He hadn't meant it that way. He wasn't trying to own anything, not a person, not even gratitude. He only wanted to help, but he understood exactly how it had sounded to someone who lived on the edge. He put the pouch away. "No disrespect meant," he said. "There's a boarding house down the street, hot stew for 15 cents. Thought you might use a warm meal." She studied him, searching his face for lies. "Why?" she asked. "Because I know what hunger does," he answered, "and I know what running feels like." For a heartbeat, her shoulders eased. "Named Lira," she said at last. "Lira Wyn." "Rowan Hale." Her eyes widened a little. "I know who you are. They say you shot a magistrate." "They say plenty," Rowan replied. "Most of it's wrong." She held his gaze a moment longer, then nodded once. They went to the boarding house together, sitting in the corner where the walls didn't allow surprises. Lira ate like someone afraid the food might disappear if she slowed down. That was when the door opened, and trouble stepped in with it. The door to the boarding house slammed open with a gust of frigid air, and 3 men stomped inside. Their coats were heavy with frost, their boots loud against the wooden floor, their faces set in the expression of men who enjoyed breaking things, bones included. Rowan didn't look directly at them, but he watched every movement in the reflection of the window beside him. The man leading them had a scar that hooked across his cheek, pulling the corner of his mouth into a permanent sneer. His eyes were pale and mean, like river ice just before it breaks. They swept the room once, then locked onto Lira. Her spoon stilled, the color drained from her face. Scarface stepped closer. "Well now," he drawled, "Miss Wyn, you sure do make a man work to catch you." Lira sat perfectly still, but Rowan felt the tension in the air tighten like a bowstring. "I don't know you," Lira said, voice steady but brittle at the edges. "You knew Silas Varon," Scarface replied, "and you stole something that belonged to him." Rowan saw Lira's hand tremble. Her spoon clattered against the bowl. Before she could respond, Rowan spoke. "Let the lady eat." Scarface turned toward him, slow and mocking. "This ain't your concern, mountain man." "It is now," Rowan said, his voice calm as snowfall. His fingers rested near the butt of his revolver, casual but ready. "You threatening us?" Scarface asked, squinting. "No, I'm telling you a fact." Rowan didn't blink. "Draw steel in here, someone dies, might be you." A thick silence filled the boarding house. Even the cook behind the counter froze mid-step. The three men exchanged glances. They weren't used to hesitation, but Rowan's expression didn't leave much room for guessing. Finally, Scarface snorted, "This isn't done." "It rarely is," Rowan replied. The men backed out the door, boots thudding heavy as they vanished into the snow. Rowan waited a long moment before standing. "We need to go," he said. "They'll be waiting." "Where?" Lira whispered. "Back through the kitchen. There's a rear alley. From there, we take the mule and leave the town behind." Lira hesitated. "Where would we go?" Rowan opened the rear door and scanned the street. No shadows yet, but they would come. "I've got a cabin high in the ridges. Few folks know it's there. Storm's coming, but we can beat it if we move." "And the price?" she asked softly. "No price," Rowan said, "just safety." She searched his face again, as if trying to measure the shape of his intentions. Then she nodded. "I'll go." They slipped out the back, the cold swallowing them whole. Snow was falling faster now, heavy flakes drifting like silent wings across the darkening sky. Rowan helped Lira climb onto his mare, a sturdy mountain horse that could push through blizzards without complaint. He swung up in front of her, felt her arms wrap cautiously around his waist, and urged the horse forward. Behind them, faint but growing sharper with each heartbeat, came the echoing sound of men mounting up. They were being followed. The trail leading out of Silver Bend wound through narrow cuts of rock and dense spruce. The wind shoved at them like a living thing, trying to push them back toward danger. Lira shivered violently. Her thin coat was no match for the storm. Rowan felt the tremors through her grip. "We're close," he said, though the words nearly blew away in the wind. Lira didn't answer. She was conserving every ounce of strength she had left. As the mare climbed higher, the world turned white around them, the kind of white that swallowed tracks and hid pursuers. Rowan's cabin came into view at last, a squat shape of dark logs pressed against a cliffside. Smoke rose from its chimney, exactly as he'd left it. Relief hit him hard. Inside, Lira stood before the fire trying to rub warmth back into her hands. Her cheeks flushed pink as her frozen skin thawed. She took in the cabin's small comforts, the stacked firewood, the rifles above the mantel, the shelves stocked from Rowan's years of gathering. "It's beautiful," she murmured. "It's shelter," Rowan said, though her voice warmed something in him he'd nearly forgotten he had. She sipped the pine tea he offered, eyelids drooping with exhaustion. Then he asked, "Those men, who are they really?" Lira reached into her satchel and pulled out a wrapped leather folder. "The ones who'll kill for these," she said. And before Rowan could ask more, a shadow passed across the snow outside. They weren't alone. Rowan moved silently to the narrow viewing slit beside the cabin door. The world outside was a blur of drifting snow and dark pines, but movement was unmistakable. 3 riders creeping between the trees, keeping low, rifles angled forward. They were disciplined, not the sloppy kind of hired trouble Silver Bend usually attracted. He raised a finger to his lips. Lira froze mid-breath. Through the slit, Rowan watched the riders circle, studying the cabin from every angle. They used hand signals instead of words. Their horses didn't snort or stamp. These weren't thugs, they were professionals. "They're scouts," Rowan whispered. Lira's voice was barely a breath. "Will they attack?" "Not yet, they'll wait for the rest of their group." Rowan stepped back from the wall. "We need to get ready." What followed was hours of grim, methodical preparation. Together they stacked logs near the door to slow any charge. They filled every bucket and pot with water in case the attackers tried fire. Rowan showed Lira the hidden panels carved behind shelves, the crawlspace beneath the cabin, and the narrow firing slits cut low between the logs, legacy of a man who'd lived too long with trouble trailing him. Lira absorbed the lessons fast. She moved with quiet focus, her fear melting into something sharper: resolve. "You've done this before," Rowan said as she checked a rifle's chamber. "My father taught me," she answered. "He said a woman alone should know how to stand her ground." Sounds like he was right. Night settled over the mountains like a heavy blanket. Too quiet. Rowan sat near the front slit while Lira took the back, each listening for anything that didn't belong. Hours later, Rowan finally spoke. "What happens if those papers never reach the right people?" Lira lowered her shotgun. The firelight flickered across her face. "Then nothing changes," she said softly. "Families keep losing their land. Miners get cheated out of every ounce of silver they dig. Varon and the men he works for keep growing richer, and anyone who speaks up disappears." "Who's behind it?" "Commander Thorne," she said. "He used to survey land. Now he runs a militia and forges the very claims he pretends to protect. My employer discovered the truth. Her voice cracked. They killed him and said I did it." Rowan's jaw tightened. "Thorne, the one chasing you." "He wants the papers burned," she swallowed, "and he wants me gone." Rowan nodded slowly. "Then we don't let him get either." A faint whistle drifted through the trees, low, sharp, unmistakable. "They're here," Rowan said. Lira steadied her grip. "How many?" "More than we can handle before sunrise." Before she could reply, a gunshot cracked across the valley. Then another. Bullets punched into the cabin's thick logs, spraying splinters into the dim firelight. Lira ducked behind a support beam. Rowan returned fire through a slit, dropping a shadowed figure attempting to rush the left flank. "They're spreading," Lira shouted, taking a measured shot from the back slit. The attackers surged again, bullets slamming into the walls like hailstones. The cabin shook under the barrage, but the logs held. Smoke began to drift from one corner. "They're trying to burn us out," Lira coughed. Rowan doused the smoking wall with a bucket. "Means we've scared them," he said. "Desperate men make mistakes." A torch sailed past the window, trailing fire. Another rolled across the roof. Lira moved toward the door, but Rowan grabbed her wrist. "They want you in the open." The smoke thickened. The roof crackled. "Rowan, if the cabin goes." "It won't," he said, but he kicked open the trapdoor. "Root cellar, move." They climbed down just as the first flames licked the outer beams. The cellar was cramped, but its firing slits were narrow and deadly. Lira fired first, hitting a man creeping forward with a torch. Rowan covered her side, dropping another. Outside, shouting erupted, panicked and confused. A new sound filled the valley. "Horses, many horses." A cry echoed across the ridge, fierce and wild. Rowan recognized it instantly. "Friends," he said with a grin, "old ones. Warriors from the northern range, people Rowan had helped years before, charged into the clearing, rifles barking. Commander Thorne's men scattered in chaos." "Now," Rowan shouted. He shoved open the cellar hatch, grabbed Lira's hand, and pulled her into the blinding snow. They ran toward the tree line, the world exploding with gunfire, shouts, and pounding hooves. One of Thorne's men spotted Lira. He raised his rifle. Rowan fired first. "Come on," he yelled. A rider swept down the slope, a tall figure with braided hair and a wolfskin cloak. "Hale," he shouted, "this way." Rowan lifted Lira onto the horse behind the rider, then hauled himself up. They raced up the mountain path as the battle roared behind them. Only when the smoke began to fade into a distant blur did Rowan realize how much he'd lost. His cabin, his isolated life, was burning. Lira touched his arm. "Rowan, I'm so sorry." He looked at the flames curling into the sky far below. "Cabins can be rebuilt," he said quietly. "People can't." By the time Rowan and Lira reached the high ridge, the storm had begun to thin, leaving streaks of pale gold behind the distant peaks. The rider who led them, Cade's snow voice, called so for the way he could make a single shout echo for miles, guided the horse into a narrow stone pass hidden between two boulders. It was a place few outsiders knew existed. Rowan slid off the horse and helped Lira down. Her legs wobbled, but she stayed upright, breath misting the cold air. Cade dismounted and frowned in the direction of the smoke still rising far below. "You stirred up a hornet's nest," Cade said. "Didn't have much choice," Rowan replied. Cade's sharp eyes flicked to Lira. "The men chasing you, they're thorn." Lira nodded. "He wants the papers I'm carrying. He'll kill anyone standing between him and covering up the fraud." Cade grunted, jaw tightening. "Then we'll see you safely out of these mountains. Thorn's militia won't follow us through our land." Lira didn't answer. She swayed, knees weakening. Rowan caught her before she collapsed. "You're freezing," he murmured. "I'm fine," she insisted, but her voice was thin as a reed. Rowan sat her on a fallen log and wrapped his coat around her shoulders. She clung to the warmth like it was the first she'd felt in days. The storm had taken its toll. Her hair was wet with melting snow, her fingers trembling despite the fire inside her spirit. "We'll rest here," Rowan said, glancing to Cade. Cade nodded. "You've got a few hours. I'll send scouts to check the trails." He whistled, sharp and short, signaling his riders. Then he strode off, leaving Rowan and Lira alone near the crackling fire Cade's men had already built. For a long while neither spoke. They simply listened to the flames and the faint echo of distant horses. Rowan stared down the slope toward where his cabin, his home, had once stood. 14 years of solitude, supplies, and memories had been swallowed by fire within a single night. "I'm sorry," Lira whispered again, her voice small. Rowan looked at her, snowflakes melting in her hair, exhaustion weighing her down. "You didn't burn my cabin," he said. "But I brought the fire." He shook his head. "You brought the truth, that's worth more." Her eyes softened. "You didn't have to help me, Rowan. You didn't even know me." "Didn't need to," Rowan answered. "I knew what it looked like when someone's been hunted too long. I knew what it felt like." A faint smile tugged at her lips. "And now?" "And now," he said, "I'm not planning on letting anyone take you." Lira drew in a shaky breath, something warm flickering in her gaze. "I'm not used to someone standing with me." "Maybe it's time you got used to it." The wind softened. The ridge brightened with the first hint of sunrise. Cade returned, snow dusting his shoulders. "The southern path is clear," he said. "At first light we ride. I'll take you to the valley. After that you'll be out of Thorn's reach." Rowan rose to his feet. "We're heading to Ironhorn City. Someone there needs to see these papers." Lira handed Rowan the leather folder. "A magistrate named Aldrich Haver. My employer trusted him. He's the only one I know who won't take a bribe." Cade nodded approvingly. "Then you'll get him those papers." Lira stepped closer to Rowan, her shoulder brushing his arm. "Whatever happens next, I stand with you." Rowan felt something shift inside him, gentle but unstoppable, like ice thawing after too many winters. "Good," he said quietly, "because I wasn't planning on standing without you." Cade cleared his throat as if pretending not to hear. "We ride soon. Rest while you can." Lira leaned her head against Rowan's shoulder. For the first time since he'd seen her in that alley behind the trading post, she didn't look ready to run. She looked like someone choosing a direction, choosing a person. Below them, the mountain stretched like a waking giant, scarred but magnificent. Snow drifted soft as feathers. Smoke from Rowan's ruined cabin faded into the horizon. "What now?" Lira whispered. Rowan looked east, where the world was turning gold. "Now," he said, "we finish what they tried to bury. We take the truth where it needs to go." He wrapped an arm around her shoulders. "And after that?" she asked. Rowan smiled, small but real. "After that, we see what a life looks like when you're not running anymore." Together, they rose as the sun broke over Frost Valley, painting the snow in warm light. The road ahead was dangerous, but for the first time in years, Rowan Hale didn't feel alone. He felt like he was heading toward a future, one built not in shadows but in the bright, rising dawn.